A virgin was his intern, and the millionaire ruined all his rules for her smile. Clara Bennett knew this elevator ride might change her life. What she didn't know was how much. She clutched her worn portfolio tightly as the doors of Ward Tech Innovations slid shut behind her. A billion-dollar tech company, known for AI breakthroughs and clean energy solutions, was now her destination. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel, crisp white shirt, a charcoal blazer she'd tailored from thrift store finds, hair pulled into a neat bun after 3 failed attempts that morning. 7:01 a.m., executive floor, 42nd level. She stood straight, inhaling deeply. Every late-night study session at Greenridge State University, every part-time job, every ramen dinner, it had all led to this moment. She had rehearsed her elevator pitch countless times in her tiny apartment mirror. Yet now, the words seemed to vanish. The 42nd floor opened up like a cathedral of power. Glass walls, white lights, hushed tones. The kind of silence that only money and innovation could create. Clara stepped out, heart racing. This wasn't just a job, it was her shot. "You must be our new intern," a warm voice interrupted her thoughts. A silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a badge that read, "Helen HR," smiled at her. "I'm Helen. We've been expecting you." "Clara Bennett," she said, nodding politely. "It's an honor to be here." "Greenridge State, right? What's your major?" "User Experience Design." Helen raised her brows, impressed. "Ward Tech doesn't usually recruit from small state schools, but your application caught the board's attention." Clara smiled. "I believe talent matters more than prestige, ma'am." Helen chuckled. "I like how you think. Come on, let's head to the 20th floor. UX team." They walked past LED display walls showcasing projects in AI and renewable energy. Clara absorbed everything. The precise way people moved, the golden glow of intentional lighting. Here, technology wasn't just a product, it was a statement. "The 20th floor is where our UX development team works," Helen explained. "You'll be assisting with user behavior analysis, design research, and sprint support." The elevator opened. Clara stepped into a sleek, open-concept workspace, all glass, calm, and glowing monitors. She was shown to a desk near the window, modest but with a panoramic view of San Francisco's skyline. "Our CTO, Julian Ward, likes to personally welcome new team members," Helen added casually. "He might swing by this afternoon." Julian Ward. The name made Clara pause, not from intimidation, but because she had studied his work, his strategic interviews, his career trajectory. He was a tech genius, the kind who never smiled in photographs. "I'll be ready," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Once Helen left, Clara opened her laptop, diving into project briefs. But even as she organized her workspace with practiced precision, she couldn't stop her thoughts from circling around a single name, Julian Ward, and the feeling that her life was about to take an unexpected turn. Clara never imagined her first morning at a tech company would be this quiet. It was 7 a.m., and the 20th floor was nearly empty. Early sunlight poured through the wide glass panels, catching dust particles midair. She stepped into the small break room tucked in the corner of the floor, the only place that buzzed with life, thanks to the slow churning of the coffee machine. She opened the cabinet, pulled out 2 white ceramic mugs, and waited in silence. Coffee was her ritual, a small comfort on a day that felt overwhelmingly new. She inhaled slowly, gripping the mug's handle like an anchor. "Good morning." The voice caught her off guard. Deep, calm, unmistakably familiar. She turned and nearly dropped the mug. Julian Ward. There was no mistaking him. Tall frame, neatly styled dark hair, and sharp eyes that saw too much. But the most surprising part? He was smiling. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said as he walked in, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who owned the space. "It's fine," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just didn't expect anyone else to be in this early." "I usually start my day around 5:30, he said with a shrug, as if that was the most natural thing in the world. "Quiet hours are when I think best. No calls, no emails asking for multi-million-dollar decisions." She let out a soft laugh. "Yeah, I like this time too. It feels like the world takes a breath before the noise begins." He looked at her, a glance longer than it needed to be. "You're Clara, right? The new UX intern." "Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you." Julian stepped toward the coffee machine, nodding toward the cup in her hand. "May I?" "Of course." Clara poured coffee into both mugs, proud that her hands weren't shaking. "Black. No sugar, no cream. Just like the magazines say about my personality." His smirk made her laugh out loud, unguarded and real. "I don't think Business Weekly does personality profiles very well." "No, but they love their dramatic headlines." He sipped his coffee, then looked at her again. "Why did you choose to intern at Ward Tech? I know you had offers from at least 2 other places." Clara blinked. "You know that? I make a point to review the background of people with potential. You turned down a major firm in New York in a high-paying role at a finance giant. You chose us, lower pay, higher expectations. That made me curious." She paused, then said honestly, "Because this is where I'll actually learn. The other 2 would have had me getting coffee and taking notes. Here, I get to be near the best. And since I didn't come from a fancy school or have connections, I had to choose the place that would push me hardest, even if it's the scariest." Julian was quiet for a few seconds. His gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was thoughtful. "You said something interesting," he said finally, his voice low but no longer distant. "That you chose the hard path because it makes you stronger." Clara nodded slightly. "I think people don't grow in comfort zones, especially people without privilege." He tilted his head as if turning over a new idea in his mind. "Most people who walk into this building talk about ambition, about speed, data, results. You started with humanity." He smiled faintly. "I don't meet many like that, especially not in this field." "Technology shouldn't just serve profit," Clara replied. "It should serve people." Julian didn't respond right away. No agreement, no challenge. But in the way he set his coffee cup down more gently, in the faraway look he cast out the window, Clara could tell something had shifted. His attention had deepened. She wasn't sure what test she had just passed, but she knew. She had been seen. By the 3rd day, Clara realized that Julian Ward always entered the break room at exactly 7:03 a.m. Not earlier, not later. And on the morning she arrived first, the coffee was already made. 1 black cup for him and 1 with oat milk for her. No one called it a routine, but the details repeated just enough to make her notice. Their morning started the same way. Calm, unhurried, sometimes entirely silent, except for the low hum of the coffee machine. But when they spoke, it was never small talk. Every question was intentional, every reply thoughtful. On Thursday morning, as Clara wiped a ring of spilled coffee from the counter, Julian asked quietly, "What did you think of yesterday's UI test run?" The question came out casually, but it held weight. He didn't look up from his tablet, yet his posture told her the answer mattered. Clara considered briefly, then answered honestly. "I think the team designed for product logic, not user perception. That works short-term, but it won't build lasting trust." Julian didn't praise or disagree. He simply nodded, lifting his gaze for a moment with a thoughtful look, as if storing her response somewhere private in his mind. In her 2nd week, Clara met Tasha Lin, head of the UX design team. With lavender hair, bright red lipstick, and sharp wit, Tasha was the first person to make Clara laugh at work. They became friendly quickly, and Tasha soon began noticing Clara's morning habit. "Every morning at 7 a.m., like clockwork," Tasha said, leaning in the break room doorway. "Funny how Mr. Ward always arrives right after you. Don't tell me that's a coincidence." Clara chuckled, a little embarrassed. "You're reading too much into it. I just like early coffee." Tasha raised a brow, half amused. "Clara, I've been here long enough to know Julian Ward doesn't share mornings with anyone. He's famously private, especially with interns." Clara opened her mouth to reply, but Tasha's tone softened. "I'm not warning you to scare you. Just be clear about where you stand. He's brilliant, yes, but closed off. People who try to enter his world usually don't come out unscathed." Clara nodded. "I'm here to learn, that's all." Tasha smiled gently, though something skeptical lingered in her eyes. "Good. Just, if one day your coffee is exactly how you like it, oat milk, 2 shots black, no sugar, you'll know something's shifted." On the 10th morning, Clara was 5 minutes late due to a stalled bus. She entered the break room, hair still damp from the morning mist, slightly out of breath. On the counter sat a single cup of coffee, steam curling upward. A label was stuck on the side. UX Fuel, CB. She froze. No one else was there. No footsteps echoed before her arrival. The coffee was made exactly how she liked it. Precisely. Intentionally. There was no note, no greeting, just a silence that felt incredibly specific. But in that stillness, Clara sensed something was changing. Not between her and her work, but between her and a man who didn't do anything accidentally. That Wednesday morning, San Francisco woke to an unusual stillness. No horns, no fluorescent lights, no printers humming or automatic doors hissing open. On the 20th floor of Ward Tech, just as Clara stepped into the elevator with her project folder, the lights flickered once, then went out. A hard click echoed. The elevator shook gently, then came to a full stop. In the thick silence that followed, she barely had time to react when a voice spoke from the opposite side. "Looks like we've hit a snag," came the low, familiar sound of Julian Ward. Even in the dark, his voice carried calm like it belonged there. "Are you okay?" she asked, steadying herself. "I'm fine. Seems like a full power outage." He paused, then added, "Is that Clara?" "Yes, I was heading to drop off a report for Helen." A few seconds passed. The only light came from the faint emergency bulb overhead, casting just enough to blur outlines, not reveal faces. Clara stepped back, leaning against the cold steel wall. She could hear her own breathing and his slight movements. "Funny," he said quietly, "how when all the tech goes silent, we finally start seeing each other." She let out a soft laugh. "I've never been stuck in an elevator before, especially not with the CTO. And I've never been stuck with someone I actually want to talk to," he answered without hesitation. She didn't reply. It wasn't flirtation. It was honesty, and it landed somewhere deep inside her. In the absence of lights, roles, and expectations, there was only presence. Just two people, no longer protected by the structure of their titles. Julian sat down first, leaning back with his legs stretched out. Clara followed, sitting opposite him, close enough to hear him breathe but far enough to respect the invisible line between them. They spoke not about goals or metrics, but about the lives hidden behind their resumes. He told her about a father who couldn't hold a job, a mother who left when he was 10, and a string of rented homes that never felt like home. He didn't elaborate on how it felt, but Clara heard the loneliness in the spaces between his words. "I learned early to take care of myself," he said, "and I stopped asking for help, because help always comes with strings." She didn't interrupt. When it was her turn, she talked about her mother, working 2 shifts, saving every coin, about her little brother with ADHD, about growing up with fluorescent kitchen lights instead of study lamps, and how strength sometimes meant holding in tears while pretending to be okay. "I never had the luxury of falling apart," she said softly, "until I walked into a place where maybe vulnerability is not weakness." Julian said nothing, but something in the quiet shifted. No hand-holding, no promises. Yet there was a weight in the air. A rare shared truth passed between them with no need for validation. When the elevator gently shook again and the lights flickered back to life, neither of them moved right away. Clara stood first, smoothing her skirt, brushing back a strand of hair. Julian rose a moment later, watching her. When the doors opened, the familiar brightness of the office greeted them, along with the faint buzz of reactivated systems. As Clara stepped out, Julian paused behind her. For a brief second, his eyes met hers. Not the gaze of a boss or a tech leader, but of a man who had just witnessed something quietly extraordinary. And as she stepped into the fluorescent light and familiar chaos, Clara knew, sometimes it's in the darkest places that we uncover the clearest truths. Ever since the elevator incident, something between Clara and Julian had shifted. Not loudly, not overtly, but enough for those paying close attention to notice. He was still the stoic CTO, still walking the halls with precise footsteps and unreadable eyes. But when those eyes landed on her, even just briefly, there was a softness, fleeting yet unmistakable. And Clara, still the diligent intern sorting user surveys and interface reports, now found her heart refusing to stay steady every morning. They never spoke of what happened. No one brought up the morning in the dark, but something had been etched quietly between them, a fragile trust, an invisible thread neither dared to tug. Which is why, when it all unraveled a week later, a small mistake in a UX dataset that triggered an unexpectedly sharp reaction from Julian, Clara was caught completely off guard. The mistake happened on what seemed like an ordinary morning. Clara arrived early as usual, opened the user behavior report for the new UX project, scheduled to be presented to the executive board by week's end, and began double-checking the numbers. But when the product team reviewed the dataset, a critical issue surfaced. The sample data had been duplicated, rendering the entire analysis unreliable. Within an hour, an email from QA flagged the error to the whole team. Tasha immediately called Clara into a side meeting. No one raised their voice, but the quiet in the room made it harder to breathe. "You missed the final validation step," Tasha said, eyes fixed on her screen. "Now we have to rebuild the entire model before Friday. The board meeting won't wait." Clara stood still, lips dry. She knew it was her fault, not because of workload or pressure, but because of a single moment of lost focus. And now that moment threatened to undo everything she had worked months to build. Julian was informed shortly after. By late afternoon, a closed-door meeting had been called on the 42nd floor. Every department lead was present: Helen from HR, QA reps, Tasha, and Clara. She sat at the far end of the table, spine straight, hands clasped. When it was her turn, Clara didn't make excuses. She stood, voice steady and calm. "The analysis error was mine. I missed the duplicated dataset. I take full responsibility, and if needed, I'm willing to withdraw from the internship program to avoid impacting the team further." The room grew colder. Helen sighed. A member of QA nodded. Tasha kept her head down. Julian, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "No withdrawal," he said, voice calm and firm. "We fixed the error. Everyone here has made mistakes. What matters is how we recover from them." All eyes turned toward him. His tone wasn't loud, but the shift in the room was immediate. He looked directly at the QA rep. "You missed the API bug in last month's release. And Tasha, your survey sample from last year misrepresented the user demographic. We don't punish people who are still learning. We teach them." Clara looked up at him. It wasn't just gratitude in her eyes, it was disbelief. She had prepared to leave quietly. Instead, he had chosen to stand beside her. After the meeting, as the others slowly filed out, Clara gathered her papers a little slower than usual. Julian remained seated. She hesitated, then approached him. "I didn't think you would defend me," she said softly. "I didn't defend you," he replied, eyes still focused ahead. "I acknowledge that you deserve to continue." "Why?" she asked. "Even after I made a mistake?" That's when Julian looked up. His gaze wasn't cold. It wasn't guarded. It was open, genuinely so. "Because you didn't run," he said quietly. "You owned it. And because—" He paused, as if weighing the risk of the next words. "Because there's something about you I trust, even though trust doesn't come easy for me." It wasn't a confession, but it was a crack in the armor, just wide enough for light to slip in. And Clara understood. Something between them had shifted, and she wasn't the only one who felt it. After the meeting ended, Julian did not leave immediately. He remained seated, eyes fixed on the empty space ahead. He didn't recognize himself. In 10 years of running WardTech, he had never once defended an employee in an emergency board meeting, let alone an intern. For him, accountability and discipline had always been non-negotiable. But today that line blurred. For a girl with determined eyes and a steady voice that didn't tremble when she owned her mistake. Clara had made an error. That fact remained. But the way she handled it, honest, direct, without excuses, left him unable to stay silent. In her, he saw a younger version of himself, someone who had no safety net, no privilege, no one to soften the fall. And beyond empathy, he felt something far more dangerous: attachment. Not admiration, not professional respect, but something that made his heart speed up when her gaze lingered just a second too long. Something that made him notice her unfinished coffee. Something that made him remember the rhythm of her footsteps each morning. Julian leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. He hated losing control. But this time, He couldn't deny it anymore. He was thinking about Clara more than he should. And worse, he wasn't sure he wanted to stop. Since the meeting, Clara had kept her distance. Not out of fear, but out of respect. She understood where the lines were drawn, and she knew that if any feeling was to grow between them, it had to be built in silence, without pressure, without rush. But Julian couldn't stay silent any longer. That night, close to 11 p.m., Clara's phone buzzed. A message from him. "Are you still awake?" She stared at the screen for a moment, then replied, "Reviewing usability testing notes. Something wrong?" He didn't respond by text. Seconds later, her phone rang. She answered. His voice came through low, deeper than usual. Not the voice of a tech executive, but of a man tired of wrestling with his own thoughts. "I know it's late," Julian said, "but if I don't say this now, I might never have the courage." Clara stayed quiet, letting him speak. "I've spent the last week trying to be rational, telling myself whatever this is between us is temporary, a connection born from circumstance, that you're an intern, I'm your mentor, and that any emotion crossing that line would be wrong. But every time I see you, none of that matters anymore." He paused, then said quietly, "I think I'm falling for you, Clara." Her heart skipped, not in shock, but in recognition. The very thing she'd been quietly asking herself had now been spoken aloud. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I'm not surprised, but I know. It's not easy to admit." Julian exhaled. "I'm not good at this. I'm afraid. Afraid that if we go any further, I'll hurt you. That I'm using a power imbalance I shouldn't. I've spent my life keeping people at a distance, so I wouldn't disappoint them. So they couldn't disappoint me." Clara sat up, back resting against the headboard, warm lamplight brushing her face with softness. "Julian," she said gently, "you're not wrong for feeling. Love isn't always logical, but it's real, and the real deserves to be heard." He didn't answer, so she continued, stronger this time. "You say you're afraid of hurting me, but I'm not that fragile. I don't need perfection. I need honesty. And the man who stood up for me in that meeting, who's calling me now at midnight to admit something he can barely say aloud, that's someone I trust." Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't cold. It was warm, unprotected, real. "So now," Julian asked softly, "what do you think about us?" Clara smiled, a smile he couldn't see, but surely felt through the stillness between them. "I think if we're brave enough to admit this, maybe we're also brave enough to see where it could go." And in the middle of a city that hadn't yet gone to sleep, between two people who had once feared heartbreak more than loneliness, something had finally been spoken, clearly, honestly, and without turning back. After that midnight call, something quietly shifted between Julian and Clara. There were no public dates, no hallway hand-holding, but the way they looked at each other during meetings had changed, and anyone observant could tell. They were cautious. They kept their connection balanced between emotion and restraint. But caution couldn't outrun whispers. On a Monday afternoon, during the quarterly strategy meeting with WardTech's largest investor, Graham Voss, sharp as a scalpel beneath his calm demeanor, Julian was presenting the company's new UX direction. Graham nodded, silent for most of it, until he turned toward Julian with a half smile. "I heard your new user insight lead is an intern." Seems like Julian's trusting his heart more than the data these days. The room froze. No one laughed. Julian's jaw tensed ever so slightly. He knew Graham wasn't saying everything, but that one line, trusting his heart more than the data, left no room for misinterpretation. That night, Julian sat alone in his office, the room dark except for his laptop screen. Graham's voice echoed in his head, mixing with a quieter one, his own. "If people find out, what will they think she earned?" Clara. He knew she was capable, honest, worthy. But the world didn't see fairness. It saw leverage, assumptions, gossip. And if he didn't stop this, the one to suffer wouldn't be him. It would be her. The next day he messaged her, "Can you meet me on the rooftop at 5:30? The sun was low when Clara arrived, casting a golden haze over the skyline. Julian leaned on the railing, hands in his pockets. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. "What is it?" she asked gently. He exhaled. "I've gone over this in my head 100 times, and it kills me to say it, but we need to stop this before it costs you everything." Clara stayed still. "Because of Graham?" He didn't deny it. "I can't let this hurt you. You have your whole career ahead of you. And I can't be the reason you become the topic of conversations you're not even in." Aunt Clara gave a quiet, bittersweet smile. "So you're protecting me by leaving me?" He turned to her, eyes red but firm. "I'm preserving what we still have left." The next morning, Clara submitted her resignation. The email was brief, respectful, with no mention of why. She packed her desk in silence. No one asked. No one dared. Julian watched her walk away, each step echoing louder than the last. He didn't move. She didn't look back. But something inside him broke quietly. The lights still turned on every morning at Ward Tech. But for Julian, the air no longer smelled like oat milk coffee. The mugs now only served one. No goodbyes were spoken, but the space between them became something heavier than silence. A regret neither of them could name, yet both carried like weight in their chest. Ever since Clara left, Julian kept showing up, on time, composed, efficient. He sat through meetings, signed off contracts, answered investor emails like clockwork. But inside, everything was unraveling. Mornings felt quieter. No oat milk coffee, waiting silently on his desk. Meetings dragged longer. No quiet, focused presence at the far end of the table. And every time he stepped into the elevator, he glanced instinctively toward the corner she once stood in during that blackout. At first, he thought he'd adjust. He had lost people before. Friends, family, opportunities. But he had never lost something he hadn't yet dared to name. And that made this different. He threw himself into work. More meetings, longer hours, late-night emails. But the busier he became, the emptier it all felt. Success without someone to share it with, it was noise, not meaning. On the fifth night, he found himself staring at her name in his contacts, thumb hovering over the call button. That's when he knew. He wasn't okay. Not because Clara resigned, but because he let her go without trying, without a word, without a fight. The next morning, his assistant forwarded the investment confirmation, $37 million secured from Graham Voss, a win for the company. Julian stared at the screen and felt nothing. That was the final crack. He shut his laptop, grabbed his coat, and walked out. No explanation, no plan, just a feeling he could no longer ignore. He had to find the one thing that made all of it make sense again. He remembered Clara once mentioning a small bookstore in Hayes Valley. The only place in the city quiet enough to hear myself think. He headed there, letting instinct guide him. And then he saw her, hair tied back, holding worn paperbacks, standing in a pocket of calm amidst a city that never paused. "Clara!" She turned, surprised. Her expression softened, but she didn't move toward him. He closed the distance, breathless, not from running, but from everything he hadn't said. "I've spent every day pretending I could live without you, but every win felt hollow, every silence louder. I can't do this anymore, not if it means doing it without you." She didn't speak. He continued, "I don't care what they think. I don't care about Graham's money or the whispers or whatever reputation I've built. If I have to walk away from all of it just to stand beside you, I will." She studied him quietly, then said, "I left so you wouldn't have to choose, so you could keep what mattered." "I've already chosen," he said, "and I choose you." From his coat pocket, he pulled a small silver ring. Not a proposal, not yet, just a symbol of what he carried with him. Every day she was gone, he didn't kneel. He simply held her hand. "Not today," he said softly, "but one day, if you still believe in us, I'll ask. And I'll mean every word. I'll never let anyone, not even myself, hurt you again." She didn't cry. She just nodded. And in that nod was everything. Forgiveness, love, and the courage to begin again. On their terms, not the world's. From that moment on Hayes Street, nothing changed overnight. But one thing became clearer than any roadmap Julian had ever written. He would never step away from this love again. 2 years passed. The world spun on. But in a 14th floor apartment filled with sunlight and soft jazz, Clara and Julian built a life. Not loud or flashy, but steady and warm, like the morning light sneaking in through half-open curtains. Clara was no longer the quiet intern. She was now Ward Tech's senior strategy advisor, a voice that mattered in every major decision, not because someone gave her a seat, but because she earned it. Julian remained CTO, still sharp, still decisive, but the one person who could pull him out of his whirlwind days with just a glance and a mug of honey tea was Clara. Their upcoming wedding would take place at the old community center, the same one Julian had refused to tear down for a real estate deal 2 years earlier. Some places can't be replaced, he had said as they walked through its aging halls. Clara had simply squeezed his hand in reply, no words needed. Their story didn't end with grand speeches or sweeping conclusions, because true love, when built with courage and truth, doesn't end. It just keeps going, day by day, in the quietest of ways. And somewhere, in a city that never stops moving, two people are still writing their modern-day fairy tale, with hearts unafraid to be broken and a faith that never burned out. And maybe one day, their story will become someone else's hope, proof that love doesn't need permission to be real.